your job to sit on their heads, literally sit on their heads, and make them, whether it's through the internet, live, whatever. Without language, you cannot learn a foreign culture. It's not possible. Because, it's like, it captures everything. So I think it's your job to the dean, to your professors, welcome, to everyone, and tell them we need Hebrew constantly. If it's to go to Israel, there are so many ways, right? You can go to Israel, to Ulpan, and start with that. You can have maybe something online or a teacher here. But if you really want to do it, you need to firstly go to language.
I think, funds are certainly a big problem when it comes to the introduction of the Hebrew language. If we talk specifically of Presidency University, then at one point of time, Presidency University actually did have Hebrew language. In fact, one of its founders was Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who learned the Hebrew language in order to read the Old Testament. And we have documentary evidence in our archives that indicates that once Hebrew language prizes were given at Presidency, when it was called Hindu College.
I'd like to introduce Professor Sriram Cholia, Dean of the School of International Affairs, who has been very supportive of various research centers, including the General Center for Israel Studies. Sriram.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for hearing me today. I was supposed to be there at the inaugural yesterday, but I couldn't make it because I was traveling for university admissions. My apologies for that. I think it's been a landmark conference for many reasons that Rohi and Kinraj would have explained already. All I'd like to say is that on behalf of the institution, we're very proud that we've been able to enhance the field of Israel studies in this country significantly over the last few years. We have established significant partnerships for student mobility from here to Israeli institutions. We have done major conferences with Israeli universities. We're very honored to have Tel Aviv University partnering with us this time. I do recall we did a big event with IDC Herzliya some time ago. The American Jewish Committee has been here, and we've also done important events with student mobility with Bar Ilan University and Hebrew University Jerusalem and so on. So I think the academic cooperation is quite extraordinary. We have also been privileged. The Center for Israel Studies here has been able to generate resources leading to hosting senior scholars who come and teach our students. Professor Tron is here, of course. Earlier, we just hosted another scholar. Prophet Orit Rosen was here, and we will have one more scholar later this year. So there is a kind of a continuous engagement with Israel studies, and I think we can fairly say that dozens, if not hundreds of our students have been trained in full-fledged master's or bachelor's level courses, or in shorter term programs to learn about Israel and its neighborhood and its connection to India. So I think it is fair to say that Jindal has become an important hub for furthering the people-to-people linkages between our two societies, especially in the academic realm. And of course, it has implications for policy making. At the School of International Affairs, we all follow very closely the expanding bilateral relationship between the two countries, which is easily at its strongest under the current dispensation in India. And I think Dr. Shashi mentioned yesterday about the impending visit of our Prime Minister, which will be a historic one, the first ever. So many taboos have been broken, and we are now actually on the cusp of, it's like a brave new world really for Israel and India as we move forward. I think the big difference between now and 3 or 4 years ago is that the present government under Narendra Modi is not looking at the Israel relationship through the prism of domestic electoral politics. That had been a major hindrance to fully realizing the potential of this relationship. There were fears in various quarters in India about how will certain sections of Indian society take it if we are seen to be too close to Israel. But now a lot of that has changed, and befittingly so, we have in a way looked at the strategic and the civilizational benefits we have from this free-flowing relationship, rather than narrow electoral, what we call in India, vote bank politics. So I think we have transcended that, and that's a welcome sign. In a way, we had not realized the full potential until we had to overcome this problem. Of course, from the Israeli side, as you know, they have always been very eager and more than happy to build this relationship. We can say with gratitude that our defense preparedness, our national security apparatus have benefited greatly from a very generous Israel, which has not hesitated to talk and to do high-tech transfer of weaponry, as well as of sharing of intelligence, counter-terrorism. In all these fields, Israel has been more forthcoming than even the United States. And understandably so, because if you look at the equation between India and Israel, there is no overlapping zone where we threaten each other. There's no major conflict of interest. Unlike US and India, because India is a rising power and aspires to be an equal of the United States in due time. And therefore, there are spheres of influence and contests over the Indian Ocean region, about China and all these factors that come in, geopolitical factors. But with Israel, there's no such, because Israel is a middle power, and India is a middle power that's trying to become a great power. So I think there's a greater convergence between these two countries, at least for the foreseeable future. So therefore, I think it's quite appropriate that the relationship is growing. And we see what all we are doing here in this university through the Israel Studies program that has been flourishing under the leadership of Rohi and Kinvraj is that in a way we are also preparing the ground for more and more stakeholders in India to understand and appreciate the value of Israel. I mean, no matter what our views are on what is going on in the Middle East, the fact is that from the bilateral prism, this relationship brings great dividends to both sides. So that's the first point. The second thing, we've also been able to keep aside some of our differences. And that shows a level of maturity, because it happens only among thick friends. So, for example, Iran. The Israelis tend to view Iran very differently from the way we do it. In fact, some of you may know that recently our Prime Minister was there, and we have invested something like $20 billion in developing the Chabahar port of the Arabian Sea. And this has tremendous strategic benefits for India as it aims to expand its access to Central Asia via Afghanistan. And because if you study the political geography, we don't have access to Afghanistan through land, even though Afghanistan is very critical for our national security interests, because it's blocked by Pakistani intransigence. So to bypass it, we are investing heavily in Iran in the Chabahar port. And there are other arenas where Iran and India work very closely, because we have not been threatened by Shiite extremism or terrorism, ever. On the other hand, most of our threats have been from Sunni jihadist groups. So we share a lot of common interests with Iran, which seen from the Israeli side look very different. So nonetheless, There have been in the past talk about how our growing closer to Israel might jeopardize our relationship with Iran, or might be seen as doing injustice to the Palestinians. So there's been a lot of hyphenation of whatever we do with Israel with third parties. But I can say with confidence today that there's a certain maturity we have achieved where we have dehyphenated it. And we are looking at Israel as an actor in itself, as a major regional power, and as, of course, also not just in strategic and defense area, but also in other fields which are critical to India's economic development. You all know the amazing stories of Israeli technology transfer for our agricultural sector, and Israeli investments, and the IT and the startup environment in Israel has great lessons for India as we try to also modernize and grow faster. So I think in my book Modi Doctrine, I recalled a very interesting comment by our Prime Minister some decades ago when he visited Israel, when he was an unknown commodity. He was a young man at the time, where he says, if they could make the desert bloom, how come we have drought and famine in our country so frequently? Why couldn't we learn from them? So there's that element as well that's propelling this relationship. It's geopolitical, it's strategic, and all this, yes, but also at the level, it's a developmental partnership too, between the two countries. And we are increasingly coming out in the open, as I said, because we've overcome the old domestic political taboos. So if you take all these together, this is the appropriate time for this kind of dialogue to happen, and I hope this is the first of many. We are really thankful to Middle East Institute and other bodies that have financed and generously supported many of our ventures. The Embassy of Israel in India has been very cooperative, and I think we are in a way a part of a track 2 or a track 3 process now with Israel, and this year the Prime Minister's visit will be critical. I think the future looks rock solid, but the question always is about how to deepen this beyond the state-to-state exchanges, and that is where I think the academic institutions come in. So we should feel like we are part of this bigger process, rather than somehow doing this in silos as if it is purely for intellectual outcome. I think there's much more that is at stake here. What I'm trying to say is this is two societies and two nations that are in a way merging, and I think increasingly you will find that we will be doing many more state-of-the-art things together. Technology transfer is of course the key, but there's so much else. Some of you are into cultural studies, and you know that there's a rich migration of peoples across our two societies. There's fairly big Jewish community in India, and we would want to, of course, strengthen all those linkages and to also work together to stabilize some parts of the world. Ultimately, I think as India grows and develops a political footprint in the Middle East, which it doesn't yet have in a big way, we will be working together. There are other reasons. I don't want to go into a lot of details right now. For example, the increasing convergence between the Gulf Cooperation Council and India, again, augurs well for the Israel relationship, because as you know, currently the GCC countries, even though they don't formally recognize Israel, have been working closely with Israel on strategic issues. So Prime Minister Modi has cultivated the Gulf Cooperation Council assiduously for foreign investment and also for countering Islamic extremism and so on. The Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi was the chief guest of our Republic Day a couple of months ago, and increasingly the Saudi, Qatar, UAE, even Bahrain to some extent, all these are being seen as critical sources for India's industrialization and modernization. So I think there is greater scope. Some of you may have heard that some kind of a track 2 interaction between Saudi and Israeli officials have been hosted in India. So things happen here. It's a good place for like-minded people to meet and to exchange. And I think these kind of linkages have to be furthered so that we all have a clear understanding of where we are heading. I think so in the overall regional and national interests, this relationship is bound up north. And all of you, I invite you to think about how we can raise this to the next level. We just celebrated 25 years of diplomatic relations last year, or this year. This is of course the 25th year. And I think there will be many commemorative events. So hopefully the outcome of this conference will also generate new thinking, and we'll put out press releases. And already Shashi Tharoor's speech has been doing the rounds in the media from yesterday. And it should of course also produce scholarly output that hopefully will inform the future of this relationship, which is actually based on destiny, but which was somehow unrealized due to loss of vision. So now the vision is back. Now we have the right kind of leadership. I think it's heading the right way, and it's actually for all of us intellectuals to think about what else is there to be is still untapped in terms of potential, and what are the other areas we could expand this relationship, and how this will help stabilize our respective regions. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.
Thank you,
Vice
Professor.
President of Tel Aviv University.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Could I say a couple of words as well? First, to express our gratitude for hosting us here at OP Jindal University. This is yet another milestone in the ever-growing relations between OP Jindal and Tel Aviv University. Tel Aviv University is the largest and most comprehensive university in Israel. In very many ways, it's also the best university in Israel, and there are very many possible areas for collaboration between our two universities. We are very happy with what we have done so far between the two law schools, for example, in the framework of your Israel Studies program. But at the same time, we are eager to take a leap forward and deepen, enlarge, widen our collaborations. We've already started discussing the possibilities of maybe joint degree programs between the two universities, holding an annual workshop of the two institutions, co-supervision of thesis and dissertation. Hello.
Vice Chancellor.
Good to see you again.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about
I'm
you?
so sorry that I missed you yesterday.
That's okay. That's perfect.
Hello.
I was just saying how happy we are with what we've done so far between OP Jindal and Tel Aviv University, and at the same time how eager we are to take a leap forward and deepen, widen, enlarge the collaboration between our two institutions. And we've already started discussing the possibilities of joint degree programs, an annual workshop, co-supervision of MA theses and doctoral dissertations. We would love to see a growing number of your students either coming for summer courses or for a semester to Tel Aviv University. We've already had several professors of ours coming here to teach at OP Jindal. Most recently, Professor Orit Rozin from our Israel Studies program. I understand that in October, Professor Asaf Lachovsky from our law school will come here to teach a seminar. So we've done a lot, but still the potential is huge, and we count on you to make sure that we move forward. And this is just another milestone, but the way to go is very large. Thank you so much for having us here. It has been a fantastic conference. I think that the group of Tel Aviv University professors who have been here for the past few days are very much impressed by what you've done. After all, it's a brand new university, but you've already managed to make an impressive inroad and to become an international renowned institution. So congratulations and thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, President, for your kind words. And as I mentioned earlier, Kinraj, that the relationship with Tel Aviv University and Jindal is very important for us. In fact, we've been at a pioneering front in India to promote Israel studies. I remember some of the earliest conversations, even within this university, there was not only resistance, but more importantly, there was a lot of ideological battles. I think it is fair to say that the faculty members of the Center for Israel Studies and also the School of International Affairs, we engage in a conversation just as we need to and ought to in academic institutions. I think today we are in a much better situation in relation to people developing a higher degree of consciousness about Israel Studies Center, but also our growing and expanding partnerships with universities in Israel. So I'm grateful to you for your leadership. As you rightly mentioned, we are still in the first decade of our evolution. We have just completed 7 years, and I know that you have a very long history, and we hope to learn a lot from your own experiences. Maybe, how much time do we have?
We have about 15 minutes.
Okay, great. So for those academics who are here who may not know about us, should I give a brief history of the university? All right, okay, good. So as some of you know, we are just 7 years old, but just to give you a perspective, in 2008, this entire place was barren land. There was nothing here. And everything that you see pretty much is 7 years old. I'm from a place called Kanyakumari, which is the southernmost tip of India. That's where Bay of Bengal, Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea conglomerates. And I always say that we know where India ends in South India, but we really don't know exactly where India ends in North India because it is disputed. So in that sense, I come from a very special place, and I did my undergraduation from Loyola College Madras, and then did my law degree from the University of Delhi, after which I got the Rhodes Scholarship to go to Oxford, did my master's. That's where I met Sriram actually. Sriram was doing his graduate studies in history, and I was doing law. And I was profoundly inspired by my experience of being at Oxford. I felt hugely compelled to sort of discover the kind of academic and intellectually engaging environment that Oxford is providing, but also to challenge my own thinking about Indian higher education. I believed that I went to two good universities in India, both Loyola College and University of Delhi, but nothing that I'd experienced in those two institutions, anything compared to what I was experiencing at Oxford. It left me with a thought that are there universities like this in India, and to what extent we should be creating them. But then that was just a thought of a graduate student. Then I got a fellowship to go to Harvard. I moved to US, and that's where it all happened. I was profoundly inspired by my experience of being at Harvard and simply experiencing American higher education, truly transformative experience of a different kind, the intellectually engaging environment within Harvard, also the emphasis on research and knowledge creation and publications, and the need for institution building to contribute towards nation building was something deeply embedded into the imagination of American higher education institutions, particularly the leading ones. I read a lot about the history of higher education in the United States and was profoundly inspired by Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and NYU, four of them being private universities created through philanthropic initiatives and grew over a long period of time. The more I read about the American higher education, I was also equally concerned about what we were doing in India, and the more I read about and also engaged with Indian institutions, I felt that there was something fundamentally wrong that we were doing. We were expanding our higher education in a significant manner, more and more public universities and private universities, but with little or no regard to quality, let alone excellence. The expansion of our higher education system led to a mediocrity of a unique kind, which we are in many ways what we have been calling, at least for the last decade, as a crisis in higher education. In fact, the word crisis doesn't even capture enough the seriousness of the problem that we are facing in our higher education institutions. It's pretty much broken. If you look at the large public education sector, we have around 45 central universities in India, including my own alma mater, Delhi University and JNU. They have over 40% faculty positions lying vacant, unfilled for over a decade. The public state universities across the country have over 50% faculty positions lying vacant, unfilled. And this has just been one of the problems. And if you go into the mediocre private universities and institutions across the country, it's over 60% faculty positions lying vacant. So we not even moving into the conversation of talking about quality, but we don't even have enough people to do the job. And of course, there are huge governance challenges, regulatory challenges, policy challenges, which are affecting the ability of higher education institutions to grow. And this is the milieu in which I was dreaming about the idea of creating a university. And after I graduated from Harvard, I was working in New York at a corporate law firm for a year, but I was obsessed with the idea of doing something in India. That's when I quit my job and joined NYU as a visiting fellow. And I didn't have a job. My wife was supporting me, and when you don't have a job and when you don't have money, big ideas come. I always tell my students that that's how big changes can happen. Of course, you should have somebody who can support it, so she was supporting me. And so I began to literally conceive of the idea of creating a university in India. In fact, this university was conceived in the basement of NYU Law Library. One of the persons whom I met at that time, who continues to be our hero and champion and chairs our International Board of Advisors, and also is a member of the governing body of the university, a very dear friend of Israel, as well as many universities in Israel, including Tel Aviv University, is Peter Schuck. Peter Schuck is a professor at Yale Law School, frequents and has spent a lot of time in Israel. So Peter Schuck, I met him at the NYU basement of the law library, and he introduced me to a lot more thinking and ideas about higher education in the US. And another person whom I met was Norman Dawson, who is the professor at NYU Law School, used to be president of the American Civil Liberties Union, a very distinguished constitutional law scholar. He told me something which I will never forget. He said in the year 2001, when I met him, late 2000 actually, and 2001 I would say, 2001 I was working in the law firm, so 2001, just after 9/11, I met him and he said, you know, Raj, when I joined NYU 40 years ago, NYU was not a second-rate university, it was a third-rate university. And it was a shocker for me because I had always known NYU to be a leading university. NYU's law school had acquired a global reputation. Its business school, the Stern Business School, was a top-rate business school. The Furman School was already very reputed. The medical school was globally renowned. So for Norman to tell me that barely 30 years ago, NYU was a third-rate university was a shocker. And of course, he told me about the transformation of NYU from a mediocre university to a world-class university. And of course, NYU's story is unique in the history of higher education anywhere in the world for a mediocre university to become a world-class in a span of 3 decades. That's just unprecedented because we know that institutions are so path-dependent. How you start matters as to where you go. But NYU was that exception. Anyway, to cut the story short, I was hugely inspired by my experience being there. Then I got a job in Japan. I moved to Tokyo. I was fascinated by Japanese universities. I studied quite closely 3 universities in Japan, the University of Tokyo, the Keio University, and the Waseda University, and 3 of them were leading universities in Japan. Many things that the United States did at that time was being borrowed by Japan, but Japan also had huge inspiration from the Germanic model of universities, including the great universities of Germany, and that model, of course, Japan and Germany had lots of other forms of relationships, so that inspired the research universities of Japan, but also strong emphasis on science and technology, engineering. That's when I was feeling good about the fact that Asia had universities like that. Then I got a job in Hong Kong. I moved from Tokyo to Hong Kong. That's where I grew as an academic. I spent almost 6 years in Hong Kong. I pretty much was in a very sweet spot. Hong Kong is this absolutely amazing city in Asia. It has 9 universities, 4 of them are top 100 in the world, rest of the 5 are top 200 in the world. Hong Kong pays the highest salaries for faculty, it has the lowest tax base, it pretty much provides unlimited resources to faculty. Almost every 2 months, unnecessarily, my computer was changed. It was just extraordinary. As a young lecturer, I had a $1 million research grant, which I didn't know what to do with. So it was just an extraordinary support system that Hong Kong could, and it could pretty much attract anybody from anywhere in the world. And across Europe and Australia and New Zealand, of course, US academics would come to Hong Kong and spend several years there. That was a kind of a place where I began to dream and also to put my dreams into paper. I was traveling around the world, although I was teaching and doing my research, but my late night project was to write and think about this university. I began writing a paper entitled Establishing India's First Global University, and I looked at universities in Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Taipei, also North America, Canada, and other parts of Europe, and began to write about that vision. By 2006, I completed the paper and got to meet with an Indian billionaire named Naveen Jindal, a upon the introduction of the then Indian Law Minister on the sidelines of a conference. I met Mr. Jindal for the first time in November 2006. I told him, and I told him about the idea of creating the university, and said that I need three things from him. I said, first, I need him to give me a lot of money. Second, I told him that I need him to give me complete academic freedom and autonomy and independence. And third, I said that I need him to ensure that we do it in a not-for-profit manner. And Mr. Jindal, being a businessman, he looked at me and said, listen, it's a very good idea what you're thinking of, but I'm into steel and power business. And it's one thing to give away a few $1,000s. I was basically asking him $100 million. And so he said, it's one thing to give away some resources for, for a charitable cause, but $100 million is a significant contribution, and I have no intention to do it right away. But keep up the good work and best wishes. I returned back to Hong Kong, and then I spent a year persuading him from December 2006 to November 2007, essentially persuading Mr. Jindal to be the John Harvard of India, to be the Yale of India, to be the Jane Stanford of India, and to do what Ranjan Shah and Li Ka-shing were doing in Singapore, in Hong Kong, as well as in China. In fact, Li Ka-shing had invited me to come and spend 3-4 days with a university he set up called Shantao University, just outside. In fact, they are having some difficulties right now as we speak, because the Chinese government is not happy with them because they are far too much independent in terms of their academic views. Anyway, so I spent, in fact, it was so interesting. I was the only academic. I had the co-founder of Skype and the chairman of Starbucks and some painters and sculptors spending like 1 week talking about the future of the world. It was just an extraordinary conversation, but the idea of philanthropy and entrepreneurship was also discussed. Anyway, so all of that I told to Mr. Jindal. But anyway, so he was hearing me for the first several months of 2007, and by April 2007, he was excited about the idea. And April to December 2007, I was talking to him more, and by August and September, he was asking more questions. And the more he asked, he was asking about what is it that really he will be in a position to get out of this, all of that. And as you know, in India, we don't have the kind of historical sort of philanthropy of the kind that US, as you know, is unique. Most countries in the world don't have that kind of opportunity for people to give away so much money for institution building. So I told him about the fact that he's not going to make money, but he's going to make a university as a tribute to his father. Posterity will remember him for the kind of contribution he would have made for higher education. And the students and faculty who will come out of this university will take the legacy forward. And I said towards the end, you know what, 25 years from now, I will make an earnest attempt to get an honorary doctorate from Harvard for you, but that's it, you're not going to make money out of it. And that was a very big thing for him. And I came to know much later that he was talking to a number of people when I was talking to him, and almost all his friends and people whom he know, and all of them said it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
He said this is somebody is trying to hoodwink you, or to say that why do you need $100 million anyways? You can build a university in $1 million too. And of course there are universities in India which are done like that. But anyway, Naveen Jindal being Naveen Jindal, and that's why I consider him as a hero and a revolutionary. Since everybody said it's a bad idea, he called me up in Hong Kong in December 2007 and said, all right, Raj, let's do it. I will give you the money. We will do it in a not-for-profit manner, and you will have the academic freedom and autonomy and independence to do what it takes to build a world-class university. But listen, I don't have any time. I would like you to move to India immediately. That's kind of billionaire talk. Just move immediately. Leave everything what you're doing and just move. I was very excited about the idea itself because it was a dream. So I took sabbatical leave from Hong Kong where I was teaching and moved to India in Jan 2008. January to April 2008, I was trying to understand India myself as I was returning to India after 10 years of studying and working abroad. And I can say to all of you, both Indians and people from other parts of the world, that I very quickly realized that we are an impossible country. Nothing works. The systems are designed to ensure so beautifully that nobody can do anything. A relatively mediocre practice of corruption, inefficiency, nepotism and favoritism of all kind, and deeply embedded vested interest has been elevated to a full-fledged science in this country with nobody can really do anything about anything at all. So that was the context in which this was all growing up. But then I had already walked into this idea so far away that I just can't come back. So I told to myself and the people whom I hired that we will move forward, but we will build a university, but we will not pay bribe to anybody at any level of government. We will ensure that we will do the right thing and still build it. So by April 2008, I quit my job in Hong Kong, and April to December 2008, we were involved in land acquisition, formulation of curriculum, course structure, program development, faculty recruitment plans, student admissions process, and also persuading the government of Haryana through 18 to 20 different committees to pass a legislation to establish the first private university in the state of Haryana. In India, you need a law passed by the Legislative Assembly or the Parliament to create a university. To cut the story short, after all of that effort, having 20 meetings with the Chief Minister, the Governor, and all those different bureaucrats at various levels, including the Bar Council of India and other bodies, on 27th January 2009, the Government of Haryana passed the legislation establishing the first private university in the state of Haryana. Immediately thereafter, I was appointed the first Vice Chancellor of the university, and we began the process of construction of campus, recruitment of faculty, and admission of students. Believe it or not, in a span of less than 6 months, we built over 100,000 square feet of built-up space, one of the fastest construction projects ever undertaken in the history of post-independent India, with India's largest construction company, Larsen & Toubro, working 24/7 from February 2009 to September 2009. During that time, we recruited faculty, admitted students, and as promised to Mr. Jindal, on 30th September 2009, we began the first academic session of the first school of the university, the Jindal Global Law School, with 100 students and 10 faculty members, 4 classrooms and 1 conference room, which was the office of me and all the 10 faculty members and the 20 administrative staff, and 100 students accommodation in a very modest manner in the first T1 academic block, only first floor. We never looked back. In 2010, we started the Jindal Global Business School. In 2011, the Jindal School of International Affairs. In 2012, the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. In 2013, the Jindal School of Liberal Arts and Humanities. In 2016, the 6th school, the Jindal School of Journalism and Communication. Today, we have completed 7 years, and there have been 5 things that have shaped our founding vision and continue to shape our mission. These include, first, we are a global university. For us to be a global university means to have a global curriculum, a global course structure, a global program, a global faculty, a global research agenda, all of which promoting global interaction. For us to be a global university means to be able to recruit faculty from around the world. Over 20% of our faculty members are non-Indian nationals recruited from 20 different countries in the world. In fact, our geographical faculty diversity is much better than old universities in Singapore and Hong Kong and South Korea and Taipei, which have far greater internationalization agenda. Our faculty members are significantly diverse than many leading universities around the world. Another aspect of our global orientation is our strong commitment to building substantive international collaborations with universities around the world, including with universities such as the University of Tel Aviv. This vision has culminated today in building of substantive international collaborations with over 165 institutions spread across 44 different countries in the world, in which we have implemented 10 different forms of collaborations. They include faculty exchange programs, student exchange programs, joint teaching, joint research, joint conferences, joint publications, dual degree programs, summer schools and winter schools, study abroad programs, and joint executive education programs. We are very conscious of that internationalization effort. The second aspect of our university's vision is our strong commitment to public service. We strongly believe that as a private university, we have a commitment to contribute towards public good, and that public good and common good needs to be reflected in our ability to attract people who may not be able to afford education. Over 70% of our students here are studying with some form of scholarship or the other. Deprivation of an educational opportunity because they can't afford should be something which we should address. If you ask me, are we doing enough? Of course not. We need to do more, but to the extent we can, we are contributing, and that's part of our important institutional agenda. We also work very closely with the local community here in Sonipat district through our clinical education programs, as well as legal awareness in the law school, but also social innovation and entrepreneurship with the business school and the public policy school as well. The third aspect of our university is a strong commitment to research and knowledge creation through publications. We have set up 49 research centers in the university, which are advancing the research aspects of our university. Our faculty members are publishing. We maintain a 1:13 faculty-student ratio, probably the best in the country. In fact, most Indian universities have a faculty-student ratio of 1:100. Most very good universities in Asia have a faculty-student ratio of 1:40. Harvard and Yale has a faculty student ratio of less than 1 is to 10. Our aspiration is to be there, but our faculty student ratio today, and continues to be the case and will be for the future, will be 1 is to 13 to 1 is to 14. That has enabled our faculty members to be able to contribute towards knowledge creation and publications. Our faculty members have produced over 1,000 publications in the last 7 years, over 50% of which are international publications, and over 50% of which are journal articles. The fourth aspect of our university is our strong commitment to creating an intellectually vibrant environment through conferences, lectures, workshops, and seminars. We have done over 1,500 of them in India, on campus, around the world, and that's something we are constantly contributing towards. The last and a very important part of what we do is our strong commitment to what we call executive education and continuing education. We set up the Jindal Institute of Leadership Development and Executive Education 4 years ago, and under the aegis of JILD, we have been conducting non-degree training programs for the Government of India as well as other institutions. We train the Indian Administrative Service, the Indian Police Service, Indian Revenue Service, Indian Audit and Account Service, Indian Customs and Central Excise Service, the Indian Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Border Security Force, the Central Reserve Police Force, the Central Industrial Security Force, the Central Bureau of Investigation, the Intelligence Bureau, the Research and Analysis Wing, the Comptroller and Auditor General's Office, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, the Ministry of Environment and Forest Government of India, the Ministry of Personnel and Training, also state governments across the country, including the state of Odisha, West Bengal, Telangana, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Haryana, as well as UP. So in some ways, these programs have been part of our effort to build the knowledge base through our faculty. We've also been doing international training programs. We've been training the senior civil servants of the government of Afghanistan and the government of Bangladesh. So our story is one of 7 years. We've been recently accredited as a NAC, National Accreditation Assessment Council, A-grade university. We are the first and only university in the state of Haryana. We are among the 25 to 27% of Indian universities which has acquired the NAC A-grade accreditation, but our aspiration is to constantly improve our quality and promote excellence. Last I will say is that if there's one thing that defines the character of our university is our strong commitment to pluralism and diversity in all its manifestations. Pluralism of ideas, pluralism of people, pluralism of perspectives, and pluralism of disciplines, and constantly engaging and evolving through those perspectives. My fascinating story about pluralism, about what we do is this, and so we have a very strong relationship with China. We have extensive ties with Chinese universities, Tsinghua, Peking, Renmin, and many other universities. We have student exchanges, we have dual degree programs. Our faculty go and teach in the leading Chinese universities. Students from China come and spend time here. Now that's already a very good and interesting thing. As if that's not enough, we have a very close partnership with Taiwan. We have the Taiwan Education Center. We have extensive ties with Taiwan. Taiwanese students and faculty come here, and our students and faculty go there. We set up the Taiwan Education Center in collaboration with the Ministry of Education in Taiwan and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Government of India here, in which the Taiwanese government is funded to train our students and faculty in Chinese, Mandarin Chinese. As if that is not enough, we train the Tibetans. We train the government of the Tibetan government in exile here, in which over 200 civil servants of the government of Tibet are being trained by our faculty.
And the government of mainland China does not protest?
That's the beauty of it. So I'm sure the ambassador and others know about it, but we do it because we strongly believe that universities have a larger responsibility to promote the most diverse of thoughts and perspectives. So I meet the Chinese ambassador, and I'm sure they are aware of it, but they realize that universities are, institutions which ought to be promoting intellectual diversity. Right. And so we work very closely with the Tibetan government. In fact, the Prime Minister of the Tibetan government in exile, Lobsang, is a very old friend of mine, from a classmate from both Delhi University and Harvard. So he has come and spoken here, and we of course hosted the Chinese ambassador. So in some ways, we have been able to create a way by which the commitment to pluralism and diversity is reflected in our ethos, in our institutional values, in our institution building effort. But I want to end this thought by saying that everything that has been possible here was actually because of two individuals and institutional creations. One was, of course, the benefactor, Mr. Naveen Jindal. He has not only made a huge act of philanthropy, but has kept himself away from the functioning of the institution. It's a rare, unbelievable story. It's a fairy tale. It doesn't happen in India, unlike in the US. In fact, even in Canada, it doesn't happen. I know stories of people who have funded it and then, trying to interview, but that's not the way this place functions. The second, which is very important, is our people who have believed and supported us from far and wide and around the world. Beginning with Americans. Americans have been the strongest supporters. We have closest partnership with the leading American universities. I mentioned Peter Schuck. You know what, President Rain? I have letters from Harvard and Yale and Columbia and Michigan as early as 2008 when I was acquiring land that they will collaborate with the non-existent OP Jindal Global University. That is the kind of leap of faith and far-sighted vision that Americans brought to it. We were supported by, in that sense, long ago. And of course, over the years, we've been partnering with institutions and countries around the world. And I see this effort that we are building today between the Tel Aviv University and JGU, as well as the Center for Israel Studies and your scholars and research institutions, as a part of our civilizational engagement towards contributing to the future of young people of both our countries. Despite all the problems that I talked about of India, the fact is 850 million people in India are less than 35 years of age. These young people, 850 million people who are less than 35 years of age, are not only going to shape the future of India, but will be shaping the future of the world. The life expectancy of India has increased. It's hovering around 70 and will go further. That means Indians are going to live longer, while the demographic situation around the world is changing significantly. Good part of the Western world, the demographic difference is significantly there. The age is going to be a factor not only in the developed world, but also in the developing world. In some ways, world has an important stake in India. Right. And that is why what we are doing here is a part of that larger effort towards advancing our goals and aspirations. I am grateful to my faculty members who are leading this effort despite number of challenges that we face in India. They are reflective of what the rector of Nanyang Technological University once told when he was asked that what would it take to build a world-class university, because NTU is one of those truly world-class universities which emerged in a relatively barely 2 to 3 decades from nothing to a truly world-class university. So NTU rector was asked, what would it take to build a world-class university? And he said, basically it takes 3 things to build a world-class university. First, it is the people. Second, the people. And third, the people. So it is the people which is reflected in our faculty and students who are really building this university. And I am really grateful to them for their vision and their contribution. And most of all, the faculty members who are here, it is their colleague. They are here in Sonipat, which is in Jagdishpur village in the state of Haryana, and we would like to believe that we are building the intellectual capital of the world. It takes guts to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so Thank you so much. It's truly impressive, and you are a pioneer and a visionary. And I'm very happy that you are about to come and visit us within a few weeks. We will meet on June 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. Give me a couple of minutes and I will very briefly introduce the faculty members from Tel Aviv University who are here. Professor Asher Sasser, he is a professor of our Department of Middle Eastern and African History, the Dayan Center for Research on the Middle East, and he will give a keynote address within a few minutes. Professor Daniel Ave from our Department of Philosophy is a frequent, he has spent very many years here in India, a frequent visitor here, just spent a semester at JNU. Professor Oli Parchek from our Department of Asian Studies, also a frequent visitor to India, and Professor Nitzan Ben Shaul from our School of Film and Television.
And NYU graduate.
And NYU graduate. And by the way, the School of Film and Television at Tel Aviv University is the Steve Tisch School of Film and Television, like in New York.
Yes, of course, of course.
And
in fact, NYU, we've drawn a lot of inspiration. underneath our logo, underneath the name of our university, there is a phrase called a private university promoting public service.
Exactly.
It's not original.
Right.
NYU's byline is called a private university in public service. And I was very conscious, in is not enough in India. You need to promote. So I replaced it in with promoting and added that. So this is part of NYU's tribute.
NYU has this torch.
Yes,
Symbol.
yes,
Right.
yeah.
The torch is bringing light to the people and the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Onto the nation. And NYU has about 10 global research institutes around the world. One of them is based at Tel Aviv
excellent.
University, and we have very close ties with them. So again, thank you so much. And we look forward to your visit and then to Modi's visit.
Yes,
and,
of course.
We have
of
a
course.
series of visits
That's
of
right. Yes, yes.
Indian leaders coming to
Absolutely.
Israel. So this is wonderful.
Thank
you so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you pass on my card so that
Said, what a great privilege and pleasure. It's already a great institution. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I hope this is my first visit to India, but I hope it won't be the last. Looking at Israel's place in the region, I will begin very briefly with the period after Israel's creation in 1948. Where, and this may sound a little familiar from things that we've heard from some of our other speakers today, the founding fathers of Israel were very pessimistic about the future. Israel won the war in 1948, but at great cost. And the leaders of the time in the 1950s, Ben-Gurion and his generation, for a variety of reasons, both European and Middle Eastern, were a pessimistic lot. Their fear was that Israel would not be able to contend effectively with the potential power of the Arabs. Israel was a very small country, had a very small population, and there was great fear that the Arab states would modernize. They had massive populations in comparison to Israel. They would establish huge armies in collaboration with the Soviet Union. And Israel would not be able to face the music, particularly when the Arabs were saying very specifically after 1948, in no uncertain terms, the war with Israel will continue. There will be a second round. In Arabic, they would say al-jawla al-thaniya. That is like a second round in a boxing match. This is not over. We lost the first round, but we're going to win the second round. And Israel was constantly under this siege mentality that we heard about before, and not without some good reason. So in the early years, at the height of the conflict with the Arabs, Israel developed what it called a periphery policy. That is, since Israel was at such a rate of high hostility with the Arabs, maybe Israel could be friends with the non-Arab states of the region, Turkey, Iran, and even Ethiopia. So this was the periphery that Israel perhaps could establish some kind of relationship with. Life has changed a lot since then. The periphery is now more hostile than the core to Israel. The Arab-Israeli conflict, in terms of the interstate conflict, is essentially over. So there's nothing much left of the periphery theory, which never got very far. But when Israel was under siege, let's say in the 1950s, and the periphery theory wasn't really going very far then either, Israel went nuclear. And the reason why Israel went nuclear was this fear that it would not be able to withstand the conventional challenge of the Arabs. But then came the war of 1967, exactly 50 years ago. Within a week, is completely crushed. There is nothing left of the Nasserite formula. There is nothing left of this great messianic vision. And from then onwards, we can speak about essentially what Fouad Ajami, a great scholar of the Middle East of Lebanese extraction, called the end of Pan-Arabism. And two simultaneous but contradictory trends filled the void of Pan-Arabism. One was the entrenchment of the Arab territorial state, what the French call raison d'etat, state interest. That is, Egypt is no longer this blood bank of the Arabs, as the Egyptians would say. Egypt is Egypt first. Jordan is Jordan first, and the Palestinians too. The entrenchment of the territorial state, that is, Pan-Arabism is over, Pan-Arabism is pie in the sky, and each Arab state should look after its own state interests like other states do. Egypt won't go to war for the Arabs anymore. If it goes to war, it's for Egypt. That was one trend. The other trend, which was quite contradictory to this entrenchment of the state, was Islamic politics. Islamic radicalism, which actually challenged these states. So Egypt, after 1967, went to war with Israel, then made peace with Israel, all for Egypt's own self-interest. Egypt didn't go to war for Israel in 1973 for the sake of the Arabs. It went to war for Egypt's own needs and made peace with Israel shortly thereafter for Egypt's own interests. Just point to a political anecdote. In 1967, Israel went to war with the United Arab Republic. That was the name of Egypt after the unification between Egypt and Syria in 1958. That is, Abdel Nasser was such an Arab nationalist that the name of Egypt was dropped out of the country's name. The United Arab Republic, no Egypt. When Sadat came to power, the president who took Egypt to war with Israel in 1973, the first thing that Sadat did was to change Egypt's name to the Arab Republic of Egypt, to bring the name back, and you don't get it in the English translation. Because in Arabic, it's Gumhuriyat Misr al-Arabiya. Egypt is first, Arab is second. And this wasn't just semantics. This was the reorientation of Egyptian foreign policy. So you have this raison d'etat, the pursuit of state interest, which essentially means for the Arab states withdrawal from the conflict with Israel. Egypt, and then later Jordan, withdrew from the conflict with Israel, and just Egypt itself, Egypt's withdrawal from the conflict, the peace with Israel in the late 1970s, was the end of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Arab states cannot fight Israel without Egypt. Without Egypt, the Syrians just cannot do it. As a result, just think about the amazing phenomenon. Israel has not gone to war with any Arab state for 44 years. 1973 was the last Arab-Israeli war. And there has not been another since. People may get confused with Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982. That was not a war against Lebanon, it was a war against the PLO. It was not about Lebanon, but about the Palestinians, who essentially have been left by the Arabs to fend for themselves. After 1967, the Palestinians lost their faith in the Arab cause and sought to become more independent in the pursuit of their interests. And the Arabs were only too pleased, and this is a big mistake that I think the Palestinians made. By seeking to be more independent of the Arabs, they gave the Arabs the permission to abandon them. And essentially, this demand of the Palestinians to have an independent power of decision, Istiqlal al-Qarar al-Falastini, was the great slogan of the Palestinians, independence of Palestinian decision. The Arabs have more or less told them, go ahead, be my guest. You can be fully independent and manage on your own with Israel, which for the Palestinians is impossible. The second is Islamic politics. Now, Islamic politics, by necessity, although not intentionally, Islamic politics is very divisive. If you talk about Islamic politics, you immediately distinguish between Sunnah and Shia. Who's Islam? Then you distinguish between Sunnah and Shia, and you distinguish between Arabs, between Muslims and non-Muslims. Islamic radicalism is a forerunner to the breakup of Arab states. If Iraq is not an Arab state anymore, united by the Arabness of Sunnah and Shia, and divided between Sunnis and Shiis, And Syria is divided between Sunnis and Alawis and Druze and Ismailis and the rest. This is the forerunner to the breakup of the Arab state. Arabism had a great objective. Arabism was to succeed and to supersede sectarianism. The failure of the secular Arab ideology has reinforced sectarianism. Arabism, for all its failings, was a secular ideology. Arabism was about uniting people on the basis of the language they speak. That's a European idea. And it comes from the Germans and the Italians. This is 19th century European nationalism being implanted in the Arab world. And it seemed to have worked, but it didn't. And instead of succeeding sectarianism, Arab nationalism is perceived as a political failure. And sectarianism is all over the place. And Arab nationalism never really succeeded sectarianism, never really superseded sectarianism. Sectarianism was always under the surface of this rather superficial, thin-skinned Arab nationalism. If Sunni radicalism is divisive, Shiite radicalism is not. And why so? Sunnis, I won't go into a long debate about religious doctrine, but briefly, Sunnis emphasize the implementation of the Sharia. For a society to be just, it must be governed by Islamic law, the Sharia. By the way, the most radical thinking on this, which was adopted by the Arab Sunnis, comes from here, from Abu Ala al-Mawdudi, Pakistani. And Mawdudi wrote what he wrote in Urdu, which was then translated into Arabic and became very popular amongst the Muslim brethren. But Shiites don't speak about Tatbiq al-Sharia, the implementation of the Sharia. Shiites speak about wilayat al-faqih, the rule of the jurisprudent. So Shiites don't emphasize the law, but they emphasize the personality of the governing authority. Iran now has a faqih. Since the revolution, you have a Shiite source of inspiration and political authority. You have no source of inspiration or unified political authority in the Sunni world. There are hundreds of implementers of the Sharia and hundreds of organizations, a plethora of Islamic organizations in the Muslim world. Radical Shiism is therefore far more easily controlled, dominated from Tehran. So Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Shiite militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen will look to Iran for centralizing authority. There is no such centralizing authority in the Sunni world. So for Iran, this whole business of religious radicalism is a tool for hegemonic design. Not that the Iranians planned all this. They could not have done so. But as things have evolved, Shiite radicalism is far more of a service to Iranian regional ambition than Sunni radicalism is to any of the Sunni Arab states. And therefore, Iran has an edge on the Sunnis in this great struggle of influence between Sunnah and Shia. So what are the causes of this decline of the Arabs? There are reports, any of you have any interest whatsoever in the Middle East, and I'm sorry, I call the Middle East out of habit, although I think you guys have got it right. West Asia is what we should call it. The Middle East is a funny name. After all, if you live in Tel Aviv or in Tehran and anywhere, it's not the middle or the east of anything. The Middle East is only the Middle East if you look at the Middle East from Paris or from London or from Washington. It's a foreign term imposed on us by foreigners. And the strange story of this Middle East is that all of us in the Middle East, we all accept it.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, in Arabic, Turkish, we all call it the Middle East, even though from our point of view, it's nonsensical.
It's even worse in some places. It's the Near East.
Yeah, but it's the same reason, that place that is halfway to the Far East. But if we look at the UN, what they call the Arab Human Development Reports, these reports have been coming out now for more than a decade, since the early 2000s, more or less on an annual basis. The Arab Human Development Reports, or as the name suggests, reports on the human development of the Arab world, and these are very pessimistic reports. If you read these reports from the early 2000s onwards and you see thereafter the Arab Spring, you can see exactly where the Arab Spring really comes from. And these reports, and I would say you must also bear in mind that these Arab Human Development Reports are written by Arabs. By Arab sociologists, political scientists, statisticians, etc., for the most part Arabs who work for the UN. These are not reports written for the UN by Westerners or by people who may have some anti-Arab bias for whatever reason. And therefore, all the more reason to take them very seriously. And they speak about three deficits. The first is the deficit in political freedom. The second is the deficit in first world education systems. And the third is the deficit in gender equality. Now, if you look at these three factors with a little bit more detail, you take the first two, the deficit in political freedom and the deficit in first world education systems. You have Arab economies and societies that are very weak in comparison to countries like Israel or Western technological nations or India with its technological base. Very weak in the sphere of innovation, and therefore are very poor competitors in the economy of today. The third factor is perhaps the worst of all, the lack of gender equality. Now, people talk about gender equality for all sorts of reasons. It's very politically correct to talk about gender equality, and I have, of course, nothing against gender equality, but it's about economics. If women are largely marginalized from the education system, and worse, largely marginalized from the workforce, which is the case in the Arab countries, you have a situation where half the population doesn't work. That's just given. Now, if half the population doesn't work, and women have a relatively poor education, they tend to have large families. This is not Middle Eastern, this is universal. The higher level of female education, the smaller families they tend to have. So you have a situation in the Arab countries where you have poor performing economies with rapidly growing populations. Well, you don't have to be an economist to understand that that is a recipe for disaster. Now, this is no longer, this is the prediction. By the way, this is the prediction that Egyptian economists made in the late 1930s. But nobody listened to them. So now, we're in it. This is it. This is the disaster. This is the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring is not about democracy and autocracy. The Arab Spring is about this disaster, which has hit the generation, what an American historian called the waithood generation. You have childhood, and then you have boyhood, and then you arrive at the age of 18 to 30, this age of waithood, where you wait. You wait for a decent education. You wait for a decent job. You wait for an income to get married and to have a life like everybody. Well, you don't.